Tá bem, então, boa tarde a todos. Good afternoon, everyone. It's time for us to start this final, this fourth panel of the conference. My name is Francisco Ferreira. I'm a professor at the new University of Lisbon in the College of Sciences and Technology in the Department of Environmental Sciences and Engineering. But actually, within this Global Studies program, we are particularly involved as CENSE, which is the Center for Environmental Sustainability, and this afternoon it's going to be a little bit different from, I should say, from the different three conferences or three parts that we had previously. And that is exactly the challenge of this program. Is that we have the political areas, the areas related with law, with history, and now we're going to discuss one of the surely most critical areas for the planet, which is the environment, and that of course has or should have a direct relation with the other topics that we discussed previously. So we're going to start before I present the other two speakers. As in the beginning of the other sessions, we will start with a vision from one of the students of the PhD program students, Pedro Clemente. He will show us what is important to look at and to discuss within this topic, and afterwards we will hear from Helen, ApSimon, and Paulo Magalhães, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy the topics that we will have the opportunity to discuss here during this afternoon. So, Pedro, let me just, before Pedro starts, let me just remind you that for the ones that go to dinner this afternoon, it's at 8 o'clock Portuguese time and English time.
Yes.
Yeah, you see that English time here means has two meanings, which means to be there at 8, and indeed we are in the same time meridian, so it is correct to say that it's London and Lisbon. And it's in Café no Chiado, and Café no Chiado is it's very close to the if you take the underground, it's just very close to the exit of the upper station, so the Chiado, and it's close to a well-known theater called São Carlos, and if you had any doubts, it's in Largo Picadeiro, number 10. It could be number 10 Downing Street, but it's not. It's Largo Picadeiro, number 10, and it has a red, how do you say, canvas or told awning, awning, and it's quite visible. It's on the if you're facing forward the theater, it's on your right side. So it's quite easy to find it. So 8 o'clock there, and now I give the word to Pedro to talk about the Earth system sustainability and within our program.
So good afternoon all. Thanks a lot for being here on a Saturday afternoon.
So I'll be representing here my colleagues that also work on Earth system sustainability within this PhD program. So I will start. I'm an environmental engineer, so I have to start by saying that. But I'm going to try to take my chances on history a little bit, on the history of evolution, where the main question is how come we as a species became so dominant and powerful in the world? So probably you don't realize, but we have the ability, like no other species, to change mountains, not metaphorically, physically. You can move mountains, you can change rivers. We are incredibly powerful as a species. So how come we became so strong and how we became so with so much impact in the world? So what makes us different of other species? So there are so many theories, but one that I think is very interesting and very right is that we are the only species in the world that has the ability to cooperate in flexible, adaptable groups in large number of individuals. So no other species can do that. So if you think of chimpanzees that are very similar to us, they can cooperate in organized, flexible, adaptable groups, but in small numbers. Why is that? Because they need compassion. They need to know each other. Otherwise, they won't cooperate. So imagine we can be nowadays in 6,000 people in a stadium, a football stadium. We can all comply with the rules, cheer for the same team, and we all behave very well, and everything works. If you put 6,000 chimpanzees in the stadium, it's a mess. You just can't imagine. It doesn't work. So, but otherwise, if you think about bees, they cooperate in groups with large numbers of individuals like us, but they're not flexible. For example, they have the queen bee and they have their own structure. The thing is that if the queen bee dies, there are no bee revolution. There are no democratic beehives. They just elect a new bee. So they're not flexible and they're adaptive as a group. In that sense, what we have done as species was to do this, to have this model, this specific feature. And why do we have it? Because we have inspiration, because we can dream. So we can create a story, a narrative. We can create an idea, and then everyone, we share it around the other individuals, and then we all follow the same idea. Although, despite we don't know each other, we don't live close by, but we have the same idea. Some of the most successful narratives or fictions that we have created are like religion, money, nation-state borders. They don't exist. They're not real. They just are created by us. They're just fictions. And these fictions were very, very good to improve our living standards. As a species, we kind of prospered. We thrived. We are increasingly dominant. What's the problem is that we got so caught up in this fiction that we have created that we kind of forgot the other sphere, reality. So we are the only species that lives in two realities. Other species live in the sphere of the real world. So with trees, mountains, with lions, with rivers. We are the only species that also live in this reality sphere. We also have the trees, we also live in the rivers, we dive in the sea, but we also live in another sphere, which is the fictional sphere, the one that we have created. And the problem nowadays is that we were so caught up in our fictional sphere, in our borders, in our money, in our currency, that we kind of forgot the real sphere. We kind of forgot how important it is to have clean air, to have clean water, to have flowing rivers, to have unpolluted soil. We kind of forgot about it. And the problem is that we are now facing realities catching up. So now we are facing climate change, over-exploitation of resources, ecosystem disruption, biodiversity loss. Our main issue and problem today is that our real world is not able to sustain our fictional world. So the world has no ecological, physical capacity to maintain our stories, our realities that we have created. That's the main issue. What we have to do now is go back to our main characteristic as a species, is to be inspired and to be creative and create a new story using new mechanisms, fresh thinking, work at different scales, and create a new story, a new narrative that is sustainable within the real world where we actually live. So we need to bring these worlds together. So we, in this PhD, are trying to do something towards that effort. So I'm just going to navigate quickly about the themes that we are working with, which are quite different, actually. So INES is working about sustainable transitions and the degrowth debate. So how can we then degrow from a very demanding, high-consuming reality that we build into a more sustainable world? Then Anna, which is also working in sustainable transition, but in the scope of a circular economy, how can we make it be more circular and having less waste? Then Julia, which is working on private protected areas. How can we get new governance for protected areas? How can we conserve the planet and the resources? Me, I'm working also on tackling these trade-offs on biodiversity conservation, but working on transboundary conservation. How can countries get together and make governance flexible to adjust to ecological criteria or resources? Then we have Patricia, which is working on collaborative approaches for developing innovative transitions for corporate sustainability, more on the business sector. And then you have Luis, which is working on city transitions and self-sufficient future. So we are going to present or discuss three key challenges that we found are very common to all of our work and that we find are quite relevant for this panel to discuss or at least debate for a while. So one of the issues is the role of states. So what we have seen is that these challenges like climate change or biodiversity loss are like global issues. There are not issues that are contained within the national borders of countries. So even if I'm a country with the high control of borders and the trades between our borders, I'm not able to solve these global issues. So states still remain like major sites of regulation, major institutions, but governance now becomes more multi-layered and cross-cutting. So we need to address other scales, other institutions at different levels. And this has revealed the growth on super-state institutions. So you kind of have this global, that we know that we have global problems, so we need to think global and act locally. So to think global, we need global institutions. But if you want to act local, you need to have sub-state governments that are active and that they are, taking action towards these problems. So states kind of got in between the global and the local scale. And cities that now constitute over 3/4 of the current global economy, they have more than half of the global population, and they consume lots of energy, lots of greenhouse gases. So we're talking about a scale which is quite small, it's a local one, cities, but they are incredibly high in terms of impact at a global scale. So if you look at 1950s, we have like the most populated city was New York with 12 million inhabitants. So in 2010, the highest one is Tokyo with 36 million. So in 2010, the top 10 mega cities have more population than Portugal itself. So, and you can see quite a shift in terms of geography. We have lots of cities here like London, Paris, Moscow. Now, in 2010, we don't have anything in Europe. Everything is now in Southeast Asia, South America. So the centers of decision are shifting, and cities are becoming much more influenced. So our main challenge, or at least concern, is how can global governance can be reshaped to embody this new international power of cities? So how can we bring these new actors to global governance to tackle these global issues? So they are becoming much more active. We actually see at the UN conventions, cities are becoming more participative. They're creating their own forums, going over states. We actually see this in the United States. So, for example, Trump just refused the Paris Agreement, but then we have like states and cities just say, okay, there's no problem. The United States are not there, but we are going to be there. So these new actors should be engaged and should be included in decision making. Another issue that is quite relevant is about the role of civil society. So how can civil society, how can people contribute to tackle these global issues? So for example, now that we are in an age of social media, people are more easily in touch with each other, they can communicate, they can express their opinions. So somehow we can have people collaborating in the design and the implementation of policies. We can have grassroots groups that create new alternatives, that bring new ideas and bring to light these new alternatives. And we also have the classical opposition movements that claim for a more radical change. So we have to find ways to kind of integrate all these different types of strategies and approaches of civil society to kind of use them as a driving force for change. But they can only be changed, they can only be empowered within a certain range of aspects. And we look at, for example, wealth, educational opportunities, equity and fairness. So these all kind of hinders the possibility of civil society to participate. And one very interesting issue is the state of freedom worldwide. I was recently in a forum with parks of natural parks from all over the world, and European guys in the United States were discussing. So our main concerns are political turnover. So if it's a left-wing government, we are okay. If it's a right-wing government, it's a problem. So we are not gender equality in our decision making. So we have much more men, much less women. So this is one level of problems. And then you have people from the Middle East, and they were saying, so our main problem is that we cannot gather in a room like this and talk about a subject because it's subversive. So this is our main issue, is that we are not actually allowed to talk about things or to gather and discuss things. So in different parts of the world, we are facing the same problem, but we have different levels of capacity to engage with it. So we wanted to discuss or bring to the panel what will be the key enabling conditions for interested citizens to engage in a sustainable transition. This is quite challenging for you. Yeah, I know. So and then to finish, we have like the business sector because okay, we have states, we have civil society, but also companies. Business sector is also quite relevant because value chains, commerce, trade became much more global. So everything is being localized to other countries, things are moving. If you have a car, part of the car is built in Germany, other pieces come from China, then it's assembled in Portugal. So all the global chain is quite mixed and complex. So this brings also new challenges. And then companies are trying to react, and also states. States and countries have kind of limitations in how are they able to react. For example, they have laws, they can create laws, regulations, but it's difficult to control outside their borders. And then companies, they are trying to build more corporate sustainable policies, reports, environmental sustainability, but then they are just moving their production to countries with lower levels of regulation. So they're kind of a bit in the middle of how to manage these challenges. So there's kind of a bit of an even transition between what was the traditional type of commerce and trade and business to a transition to a more international type of business. So how can companies be motivated to change their processes or their products to be more sustainable, especially when they move to countries or when they work in countries with limited regulations? So how can they escape this attractiveness of paying less, getting more profits, going over environmental issues? So I'm just going to end up with this, I think, interesting quote from Gandhi, which is basically bringing us back to basics, which is Earth provides us enough to satisfy every man's needs, but not everyone's greed. So we just have to really establish what are our real needs, because everything else is just greed. So thank you.
Okay, so let me introduce Helen. Actually, before that, just to say that we do participate from FCT-NOVA, and FCT here is the College of Sciences and Technology. We do assure one curricular unit or one discipline, one course in the program called Sustainability and Climate Change. Actually, it's Julia Seixas who's there that is also responsible for that course that takes place in the first semester. And now let me introduce Helen ApSimon. Helen comes from the Imperial College in London, but I think that I knew Helen, I don't know, 10 years ago or 15 years ago maybe.
Going back behind that.
Yeah. Because we we actually participate in an international framework called the Task Force for Integrated Assessment Modeling, which actually looks at how transboundary pollution, in this case transboundary air pollution, can actually be monitored, evaluated, and of course, as particularly as scientists, we can actually provide the governments and the politicians with a better understanding of what is going on and what can or should be done internationally to lower the impact of this air pollution. And so Helen has an extended experience in this area, and this is in the context of the United Nations. She will explain the UNECE, but we're going actually to see two perspectives here, I believe. One that is from Helen, which is how can we look at this framework and how can we actually add value to the change that is needed to provide us with a better environment, and then Paulo, who is a recent doctorate from from the College of Sciences and Humanities, social humanities.
Yes.
Yeah, and he will present, the perspective of a model that we can have to look at the Earth system, the complex Earth system, and how to manage it with our best scientific knowledge, but with of course the way the politicians can look at it in a new perspective to help us get a more sustainable development. So without further ado, Helen, thank you very much for coming, and the floor is yours. We have 2 hours, which is probably too much. So I know that 20 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour maximum would be great for you, Paulo, too, and then we'll have a discussion.
Okay. Well, first, thank you very much for inviting me. I am a humble atmospheric scientist, so I'm a little bit blown by the breadth of what we are addressing here. And all I can tell you is from my perspective and experience. I'm going to start off with the same picture of the Earth that I think Helena showed yesterday. And I'm going to start off by asking you a question. Hands up, anybody who can tell me how much space there is on the Earth per person. Anyone?
Okay, including the oceans?
Yes. Shall I tell you the answer? The area of the Earth is about 500 million square kilometers and there's about 7 billion people. So the answer is it's an area of about 260 meters by 260 meters per person. It's quite a shock, isn't it? That includes all the oceans, all the ice caps, the areas that are unproductive. When you think of it like that, it's perhaps not surprising that we come up against questions of sustainability in our environment. And I'm going to be looking at sustainability issues with the atmosphere. So, as you pointed, we've got problems at a local level with cities, but this also extends in the way that we affect our neighbours and other countries. So it becomes a transboundary issue. So I want to take this case study of what I have been involved in, working with the UN Economic Commission for Europe, which is an interesting body because it extends right across to Russia and the Urals, to one of the few bodies that really brings Russia into environmental fora, and talk about my experience of transboundary air pollution in Europe. And I think this is very much about developing the right interfaces. What can we learn about building interfaces, not only between scientists with different disciplines, but much broader? How can we interact with lawyers, with economists, with decision makers? And I think perhaps we've got some examples in this particular case study that may be of interest. So I'm going to take the problem of acid rain, which is where we started the work with this convention. So in Europe in 1970s, we started observing that forests were dying. There was a large problem of forest dieback. This was happening not only in the most polluted areas of Europe. This picture was in the Czech Republic, that was very polluted, but also in remote areas like Scandinavia, areas that we thought of as clean. Scientists were noticing other things which started coming to general attention. We had people, strangely, measuring the acidity of rain across Europe. And we found that, the natural acidity of rain, with a little bit of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, should have this pH index of acidity of about 5.6. But in fact, we were finding that some of the rain looked much more like beer. The large areas where it was obviously very changed. And if we went on the top of a mountain in the cloud, we could find a cloud that was more like lemon juice or vinegar. So this was clearly a change. On the other side, we had what was happening on a social and economic front. After the Second World War, when we had this dip in industry, energy, we had this sudden, huge, fast recovery with rapid development of our industry and our use of coal. So you can see here how, after 1950, the rapid rise in sulfur dioxide emissions from the consumption of coal. So that was the social point. So how are we going to bring this together? And this is where you need an international organization to take over and bring the countries together. So already in 1985, we had this general recognition in Europe that sulfur was a problem, coal burning was a problem. And we got an agreement from countries to reduce their sulfur emissions by 30% relative to 1980. And you could see on that graph the peak starting to fall. There were two countries that didn't sign. One was the United Kingdom, because the United Kingdom said, well, we've started to reduce already, so why should we have to reduce more? And the other was Poland, who was very honest and said, economically, we can't do it. We just can't do it. So the question was, this was like nothing like enough to solve the problem. So what were we going to do? There were further reductions required. We knew that there were certain areas of Europe which were very affected, more vulnerable. We also knew that some countries were contributing much more to the problem than others. So how were we going to get a fair solution to this problem? Well, the first thing was to pose the right question to the environmental scientists who could tell us what level of deposition was sustainable. So this was the question posed to all the biologists and soil scientists, people who understood what was happening in the forests. What we wanted was something simple. We wanted a map of Europe and how much sulfur deposition we could safely put on the soil in order to not have really adverse effects. So that was a great big issue with all the scientists coming together, trying to spread that knowledge across all the countries too, among the scientific people, and trying to come out with that simple mapping of how we were going to protect our ecosystems. That's not the normal way that scientists are thinking. They're thinking in terms of producing scientific papers that a few other scientists can understand, rather than feeding into this general interface. Then we had the atmospheric scientists, and here we had a lead from the Norwegian Meteorological Services. We had very complex atmospheric models, we had weather forecasting models, all this sort of thing, but how could we use these in a different way in order to understand what countries were contributing most to the problem? So using these models to trace where the pollution comes from, it's actually deposited in the sensitive areas. As you can see, this came up with some rather embarrassing information for the UK, how much we were sort of putting on Norway, although it varied from year to year, and how much Norway was putting on the UK. So it's quite difficult being a UK scientist at this time. And obviously, all these principles, like the polluter pays, it must be those countries that are polluting that have to solve the problem. Then we have the engineers. How did the engineers come into the picture? And this is where we started laying the foundation of how you compare emission inventories in different countries. We needed to look forward and say, what are countries going to be emitting about 10 years ahead? And how can we alter things on that 10-year timescale? And a lot of environmental problems start off with this question of emission inventories. How much are you actually emitting? And we need to have clear agreement on how we do that. Then the engineers coming in. How can we alter those emissions in future? How can we control them? We know the technologies, we know their efficiencies, we know their costs. But as far as the negotiations are concerned, what we need is something that the economists and the policymakers are going to understand. And so IASA, International Institute of Applied Systems Analysis in Austria, took the lead here in developing what they call cost curves. So they looked at each country, what the emissions were proposed to be, how much they could reduce at what kind of cost, successively more expensive measures. So you had an idea of the effort involved. So engineering had come through to that. Then we had to put it all together. This is this task force on integrated assessment, the origins of that we talked about. At the time, we had 3 different models. We had the RAINS model by IASA, our own model at Imperial in the United Kingdom, and a model from Scandinavia. It was a question of bringing all the different categories of information together, projected emissions, the abatement options, who was doing who to what, and what we had to try and reduce the targets. So we had to turn this into strategies that we can put forward to a negotiating board. So this was the way our model worked. We sort of cycled through all the options in each country. We took the one that gave the greatest benefit as a function of cost, implemented that, and we got to cost optimized strategy, very based on economics. And then you can present things like this, where you could look at, well, certain measures that we need to take first, they'll have a big effect on ecosystem protection. It gradually gets more and more difficult, and you're not actually achieving any more. And you come down to a triangle of interest with negotiators. But that's where you've got your strategies that you can put on the table to discuss. You've got the people sitting around the table. Then you get to the what I would call the polarization stage. Because on the side of the countries that are affected, they're putting more and more arguments together. So you get the wider effects of acidification coming in. Hence the cartoon of the poor snail that can't get enough calcium for its shell with its umbrella. On the other side, we've got countries like the UK, where they've got to pay a lot. You've got the power companies grumbling. You've got the parties that are actually going to incur the costs, making a big fuss about it. So how can you persuade them? And this is where you have to come down to the other level, the more local level, and start working on the persuasion. What's in it for them? So obviously from the point of view of a country like the UK, we were solving a lot of local pollution problems too. So this is where the benefits come out. We were reducing damage to building surfaces, crumbling of our limestone, all this sort of thing in the home country. Strangely, the biggest benefit was the one that would really have had political clout, and it was the one of the health benefits. But we weren't allowed to use that because of the conflict. It was a different UN body, WHO, that was responsible for health. So we got into very dangerous ground in delivering these arguments. So we developed a protocol, we got an agreement. That played the foundation for what has become very much more complicated. Acid rain was just an initial easy problem to solve. There are many more problems that we have to deal with that are affecting human health, biodiversity. We have problems to general ecosystems, to crops, to forests. And so we have developed a multi-pollutant, multi-effect type approach now within the UN ECE. Interestingly, in the UN, the European Union had the same status as a member country. It didn't like that very much. So it started taking off on its own. And of course, this has been a period when we've had very interesting changes in Europe, with Eastern European countries joining the EU. So gradually more of the UNECE area has come in under the EU. And the EU has rather taken over in setting the national agency. This is a problem because it's left the other countries a bit more isolated, and that's one of the things we're concerned about at the moment. How do we still keep up a dialogue with Russia, with some of the other countries? I just want to show that we really think this has been a success story. This is what we think will happen from when we first saw the acidification problem to what we think will happen in 2030. No more red areas on the map. Something you're a bit more concerned about in Portugal probably, ozone. Again, we'll have improvements there. There we have to be careful though, because what we do on a European scale is embedded in what happens at a global scale. And as China, other countries are emitting more, global levels of ozone are going up. So we have to consider what we can do in Europe in that global context. The big health burden is estimated that around about 2000-2010, the average life shortening in Europe due to particulate matter and air pollution was between 6 and 9 months. So obviously this was something that we really had strong arguments for and wanted to improve. And this is that we shan't completely solve the problems. There's still going to be areas like Poland, the problems over the Po Valley, areas in northern Italy, where we can't completely control those problems, but it will be greatly improved. So I think we can say that it's been a successful negotiating thing. This is just an example of, I put Poland and the UK up and what kind of reductions we've got to make. So we're talking about 80 to 90% reductions in sulfur to 2001 by 2030. And also large reductions in NOx, which is much more difficult, with all the growth in transport, growth in activities, going against the actual technological measures that you can take to reduce them. What I want to say is that the interaction between the international level and the national level is quite interesting. By setting ceilings, you leave the countries the flexibility in how they achieve this. So I think this is where both you and I are busy now, Francesco.
Yep.
At the national level, we want to achieve it, the ceiling, in a way that's cost effective and maximises benefits within our own country. And then we find that we are conflicted with other problems. In our own country, we have to deal with lots of different ministries because we are having to look at conflicts with climate change, with energy, with transport, with agriculture. So it's it's not just going to one little body. And we've got the city level as well, as you mentioned. Health is a major driver, so we're coming to interact with the epidemiologists and really understand health experts. And epidemiology is a very uncertain science. So how do we deal with uncertainties? Because becomes a big issue. And then we have to deal with economists. So again, we have to do cost-benefit analysis all the time. So trying to monetize environmental benefits. How do you value ecosystems? It's quite a big problem. So I think really my message is that it's really how can we communicate our scientists and engineers within this system. We've talked about meteorologists, biologists, geologists, medical people, engineers, technology. We've all had to come together in this process. So what can we learn from this example? We know that this example, this is a European example, but the same kind of thing is happening elsewhere. And there are attempts to try and introduce the same kind of process, IASA with the gains model, in other parts of the world. So in China, Asia. I don't know quite how successful that is going to be, but at least it's a framework of knowledge that we can try to transfer. And so I think this raises questions about how can scientists be credible? We're aware of the problems with climate at the moment. We've got the people who don't really believe that climate change is real, including President Trump. How can we convince these people? I've talked about how we're interacting with institutions, but how do we interact with people like Trump? People that have got power. And I've got one final slide, because we have to think of the width of problems we're dealing with. You're aware of the carbon cycle and the climate problem. Who here has really got into the nitrogen problem? Are you aware that we're completely changing the way we're cycling nitrogen in the environment? It started after the First World War, when we developed the Haber-Bosch process and we could produce ammonium nitrate for bombs. But you need ammonium nitrate for fertilizers. And this has been such a huge thing in feeding world population. Now we've got pressures because that is completely changing the cycling of nitrogen in the environment. It's causing a very wide range of environmental problems. It's responsible for a lot of the problems with biodiversity. And this is something where the scientists are very aware. But how do we actually get interest and action on these emerging problems? And okay, we know there are areas where we're using fertilizer very widely, eating too much, but we've also got these areas of Africa that are really starving, and we've got that great inequality. So it's a much broader problem. How can we solve those types of problems? And what is the role of the scientist and the engineer? Okay?
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so now we will hear a different perspective from Paulo Magalhães, that has been working in this framework for a long time, and he's going to talk about the common home of humanity. I will only recommend that I know that some of the language that Helen may have used just let this Turkish Airlines plane pass by. Some of the language that Helen used may not be completely understandable by you. I felt that in classes, like talking about ozone, and a lot of people, they forgot to what they learned probably in the 8th grade or so, that ozone can be bad and ozone can be good. good, around 45 kilometers up, but bad if we actually have it in our close to our surface. But what I think it's very important to get from Helen is that a lot of people only heard about agreements between countries related with pollution when they started to hear about the Kyoto Protocol and the United Nations framework convention on climate change. And this air pollution work actually started way back before. And that really and without any comments about on climate change, this work is extremely complicated, as Helen presented, because we have economic issues, health issues, ecosystems, and then the policies that go from the national level to the local level. And of course we have to talk about law. We have to talk about the different political systems, the decision-making systems, and all that. And that's the reason why this issue is so I would say fascinating in terms of how we can look at this in an integrated way. Now Paulo is going to go a step further. I see that everyone starts with the planet. Sometimes the whole planet, sometimes just part of the planet. But let's see what this new perspective is.
Okay, thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here discussing this with a PhD on globalization. And it's impossible to have better introduction than the introduction of Pedro Clemente, and also with Helen, because Pedro talks about the difference between the reality and the capacity of human beings to represent this reality. And he said it's a very good way of seeing that our main reason of success is the capacity of telling stories, the story of religion or the story of sovereignty, and so on. So the basis of this program, I think, it's what we will talk. I'm a jurist. That's my base information. I will talk about stories because law is a story. Is a human construction, is a human abstraction that now we found that is not connected with reality. The idea of sovereignty burns 500 years ago. What you know about the world now is very different than what we know that when we invent the idea of sovereignty. So the question is not saying that we will end up the story of sovereignty. Is the story that the challenge is to say if sovereignty is able to coexist with the global function of that system. And one thing that I like very much in this approach before is they are already talking about their system. They are not talking about the planet. And this is the first step to understand the reality and our ability to represent what we know about this. The process of globalization it's there. Okay, it's no use trying to forget or to trying to solve the problem of globalization, deeping the sovereignty. Okay, unless the result of the deeping of sovereignty will be to lose sovereignty. The only way to achieve, to maintain the sovereignty is to have one agreement on the use of the global commons. The question is, which is global common in the planet? What are the global commons we have in the planet? And until now, and sorry, I still have these slides of givens that we still have a globalization that is a disorder. We have no governance. And the question of global governance is, which is the object of global governance? What global governance governs? The planet, the countries, which is the global? This is the question, the previous question to this one. So what Gideon said is, in order to overcome this challenge, we'll have to rethink the fragment nature of international law, in the international system. And the divided wall with the interconnected Earth system, how it's possible or not to solve this question. This is the previous question, the hidden problem of the environmental problem that usually people do not talk. Usually people see environmental law as a system of law to make injunctions, to say you cannot do this, you cannot do this, if you do this, you pay this. But the first role of law is not to make sanctions. The first role of law is to organize the relations. And now the relations are global, are not only inside the countries, and doesn't function to make injunctions without organizing the relations first. And this is the reason, I think, why the environmental law doesn't work anywhere. Because the relations become global, and there are no national law that could deal with the environmental law, with the environmental problem. So only a global law that works with the national law could function. Let's try to solve this question. Now, let's think about Earth. This is Earth, our planet. And these are other planets. Which is the main difference between this planet, our planet, and the other planets? All you talk about the area of the planet is 5,100 hectares, million hectares. All these planets have an area, right? Am I right or not? I think I'm right. All the planets, bigger or smaller than Earth, they have an area. And in terms of law, the planet is an area. In terms of jurisdictions, it's one area. The global commons for law are the leftovers of the areas that we divide between states, right? But the main characteristics of this planet is the Earth system in a well-defined state. And for law, the Earth system simply does not exist. This planet has a long story of 4.5 million of years, and only in that period, the last 10,000 years, to be more correct, 11,700 years, we have the conditions that allow humankind to make a civilization. Here you have a graphic with the last 100,000 years. Is the graphic of the weight of the Arctic, and you can see here, what I will see, you have the 10,000 years. You see here, during this period, several times humankind was near to the extinction because we have no biogeophysical conditions on the planet to have agriculture, to develop one civilization. And the question, which is our common home? Is the planet, or is this period of the history of the planet? This is the great question. The name of Common Home Project comes from the idea of the encyclical of Pope, that he said, we have no common home yet. If we haven't a common home, which is our common home? The planet, or the biogeophysical conditions that allow humankind to build a civilization. And this is the great problem. Okay? Our planet is a territory with a surface of 510 million kilometers divided of states. But besides this area, we have Earth system, okay? that is full of intangible, interacting, and geophysical cycles that Helen talked about this, also nitrogen cycle, ozone cycle, CO2 cycle. There are at least nine cycles that determine the state of the system. Okay? You saw in this slide, we are talking about the hardware, and here we are talking about the software. A computer without software doesn't work. A software without a computer doesn't work also. But both exist. And the software exists. We cannot touch the software. But it exists. So from a legal point of view, the planet is being treated as a geographic territory. We can so the great question is, until now we have no the scientific tools to understand what is the system, what is the favorable state of their system that are the last 10,000 years. The question, for example, before the Holocene period, it was impossible to have agriculture in our planet. Why? Because we haven't enough CO2 on the atmosphere to make agriculture for the growing of the plants. So our home is one intangible home. Is the biogeophysical conditions that now are defined by the scientists. We have here another slide about the hardware and the software. The software does not exist in law. And sorry, but I know that we have more jurists here. The objects intangible in law are usual. It's not the first time. If we recognize that system as a common heritage of mankind, it's our proposal, it will not be the first object of law that is intangible. For example, the computer and the program, the software, and results with the new information. For example, the book and idea. These are legal problems that without solving the legal solution, we do not have our society. When we buy a book, we do not buy idea. Why? Because there are one law, the British law, the first one, the copyright law, from the 18th century, that says the idea exists in the different way of the book. They protect the idea, and the object of law is intangible. I buy the book, I am the owner of the book, the paper, I am owner the book, but I do not own the idea. And this solution was absolutely structural to build our society, because without this, no one will write books, no one will research, no one will study, because I will work, but after I sell the book, I sell the idea. So maybe this problem also exists on nature. Nature is not only what we see. The value of a forest is not the value of the wood, of the timber. You know that the value of the Earth system services provided for Amazonia, for example, are intangible. Do not stay in Brazil. They affect, in a positive way, the intangible state of the system. So, to have your question, how value the value of ecosystems? Maybe to give value to the ecosystems, to the system services, or ecosystem service, first we need to say that these services exist. And pollution is one chemical change on their system. And also, the ecosystem services are a positive change on their system. Why these do not exist in our society? Why economy, because law do not solve this problem, still looking at the Earth system service as externalities? Because they are external to the state. They go to the global and they disappear. this means that these positive changes on the state of the system exist, but they are not represented in our legal system. And we need a legal recognition of this to have an economic visibility of this. Because without legal recognition, we have no story to tell this reality in our organization. So this is the way to put, I think, we need a global recognition that the Earth system is global, that is not correct to use on one dimension, to use only a territorial dimension to explain the Earth system, to explain our planet. Our planet is not only one area, all the planets have an area. What makes this planet different from the other planets is to having an Earth system. If you do not represent this Earth system in our organization, it will be still being one externality to our organization. And if you want to build one economy that is able to recover the ecosystems, this service must exist in our society and must have economic visibility. But for so, they need to have a legal existence before. So in our project, that now is supported by the Portuguese government, we have already made some meetings with other embassies. We will propose that system to be recognized as a common heritage, intangible natural common heritage of humankind, and with the legal basis, we are working to to make one implementation of that system accounting framework. This means we need a legal recognition and also we need a system of accountancy. The vision of the common home of humanity is a place where to preserve that system is not synonymous of that, or to have some kind of depletion, or where all the humanity and the future generations are represented through this common heritage. Yesterday we talked a lot about future generations and the discussion in law about future generations that do not have yet born, and now we have a way to defend the interests of the next generations that have no legal existence because they haven't yet born. This is a legal issue. I think the best way to represent the interests of the next generations is to give them the conditions for life, to give them some heritage. And to forget the discussion, the legal discussion about to exist or not exist, which are the persons that will exist in the next generation. We don't know who are the guys that they will exist. The question is if we nowadays can let to the next generations one common heritage that belongs to all of us and belong also for the next generation. So this new accounting system has a scientific elements. The scientists have defined what is the safe operating space for humankind, a legal element, the recognition of their system as a common heritage. One accounting element that is the system we are proposing, and also, of course, there must be one international institution that we think should be the United Nations with the new functions. We propose to be the Trusteeship Council that already exists, has no in this moment has no any function inside the UN. This is the elements that make part of this proposal. This proposal was not possible before the scientists have defined what they call the safe operating space of humanity. In some ways, the genetic code of our planet. They talk about 4 boundaries. They put for each boundary one level, one up level, one down level, and we should be between these. And this space, safe operating space, is not a territorial space. It's intangible space. It's a qualitative space. that is inside and outside all the countries. And this the most important heritage that humankind receives from nature. Is these conditions of dollars and pure is our main heritage. This is our challenge to measure and to manage something that is intangible and not legally defined yet. And what we want to measure is not the Earth system, we want to measure our use of the Earth system. This is make a lot of difference in our activity. We have already one scientist from New Zealand that proposed some quotas and the system of Earth quotas or planetary quotas for each one that could be used as a standard for all humankind. So the idea is to use also one solution that already exists, the condominium. The condominium is the only legal figure that we have where it's possible to have two legal regimes in the same place. The question of Professor James Maywell in your presentation is how it's possible to have the local, we must live somewhere, of course, but the relations somewhere in the planet are not on the local relations, are the global relations. We have global relations and local relations. And the question is, it's possible to have sovereignty under a territory and to share a common system? Yes, it's possible. If we make two different divisions. And this is the main reason why the condominium is a so great success all over the planet. Without the solution of a condominium, we have no cities in the world. Because all the people will get fight between them. The great success of the condominium was the condominium has not only a special division. Before the special division, we have a functional division. First, the jurists say that the stairs, the roof, the water system, the electricity system are common. And we have no problem if the electricity system is inside my private space, because it's common. I know that this system is common, and we have a common system to take care of the common property. And we have an overlap of common systems and private places in the same indivisible group. We live in the big condominium, is the planet, and this is the solution we are proposing for this. This is how we are working. We have one advisory council, a legal working group, and a reserve working group. We have scientists from the guys that made the Planet Boundaries initiative and defined the Earth system. The fathers of the Earth system are working with us. This is our proposal for our planet. And we have also a book, the SOS Treaty, and the Portuguese government is supporting us. I think in some month from now we will propose to put this project in a more public way. Many thanks. Thank you so much.
So as you can see, we have a history of I would say not completely success, but of considerable success told by Helen at the international level to solve environmental problems, in this case air pollution problems. And we have this proposal by Paulo to look at the Earth system in to the future and create a framework that will we hope solves engages in a sustainable development for the future generations. So first, I would like you to ask questions, and to both of them, also to Pedro, if you want. and for us to look at these two perspectives and eventually include also climate change in the discussion. And now the floor is yours. Now there is one question at least. Okay. Yep. Go ahead.
I'd like to think of the role of the academics, the traditional media, civil society to communicate this problem. I'd like to know your opinion about it. And if you believe, and also Francisco maybe can talk about it on the panel, if the new technologies, for example, virtual reality, do VR, if you create, for example, because I'm a journalist, that's why I'm asking the question. For example, with the new technologies, if you create immersive systems so that you can put the people inside situations that can be caused because of climate changes, for example, we can create environments so that people can kind of feel what could happen. Yeah. If you believe that those kind of technologies can be helpful in the communication of the possible problems or the real problems we're already facing right now in climate change.
Yes, I think you've raised the gap. Sorry, you've raised the gap in what I was talking about, because it's one thing dealing with international organizations. It's another thing convincing people. And I think there are very useful tools we can use, and you're probably aware of them. People using their carbon footprints, for example, these kinds of concepts to get over to people. And the media have a responsibility in helping with this. I have to admit that I have a certain caution with the media. I get, I suppose, 3 or 4 invitations every day from television.
Oh, that's more than me.
I'm sorry, Antonio. But you know, one has to get very careful about this because of the misrepresentation and distortion. And you know, Helen ApSimon quoted that diesel cars are now going to disappear from the planet. You know, whatever you say can get very, very distorted. So I think you raise an important issue in how do we communicate things to the public. I think your virtual reality idea is quite an interesting one to explore, to try and get people to think. We do this with our students, don't we? You try and put yourself into the position, what's going to happen when Melbourne has temperatures of 50 degrees? You get your Australian boss to come to that particular conference or discussion. But I really think we do have, I mean, I raised the issue of the nitrogen problem because I know that very few people are aware of it. Scientists are aware of it. But how do you start to communicate those kinds of ideas? And that's where I'm stuck. Probably doesn't answer your question. I think the virtual reality idea is a nice one, and certainly one that we can exploit in universities. Maybe a bit more difficult with the general public.
Paul, do you want to comment on the communication issue of the problems?
I must say that the communication issue in the common home of humanity is the main problem.
Yeah, that's true.
I have the experience of people that are inside the environmental problems to understand many things, many steps to understand the thing, and to accept that before these problems, we have a problem of overlap of sovereignties, that system interacting. We must understand that this planet, to make a division between the Earth system and the planet, two different concepts. So we could have the planet with different Earth systems. What we are trying to protect is the Earth system in the favorable state. This is many things new in the communication. So to communicate this and all the consequences of this, what as Francisco was saying is this is not the solution. What I think is a framework that enables new solutions. Okay? What we are trying to do in the environmental question is to have the same framework that gave origin to the problem and to solve the problem with the same framework. And we are only working on around the problem. We are not going to the central problem. The question is, when we have a society, then the only way to put the value of one forest on the GDP of a country is to cut the tree. We will not solve this problem. We must have one society that a tree must have a value that is bigger than the value of the timber. And to solve this problem, we have to solve, I think, all the questions that I raised during my presentation. Because
can I ask you, because it's one of, and maybe Helen too, and then Pedro, one of the things that, you know, some of the questions that I discussed with the students that we could debate here is what are the enabling conditions for the citizens to engage in this sustainability transition? What are the key factors that actually will be the determinant? One for sure is communication.
Yes.
But what are the other key factors to have a society where all the citizens engage in this transition?
You want?
Yes.
Continue.
Can I just?
Yes. Pedro, go ahead a little bit with it.
Actually, answer your question.
Okay.
Very
Pedro wants to talk a little bit about virtual reality, and then we go to the next question.
I'm working with some technologies like social media data, and also like using that data for using scenarios and for informing locals and visitors when they are trying to manage or visiting an area. So I think this type of information, this type of technology is very important and useful. But recently I was in Hong Kong, and I was really concerned about the use of virtual reality, because you were saying your idea was one, which was good, but they use it on the wrong way. So I was sitting on a bench, which was leading to like a port full of boats, and then the other side was just full of buildings and high skyscrapers. So there was no green anything. You see the ocean covered with boats, and then buildings and buildings. And then you're sitting on the bench. They have like a helmet, which was a virtual reality. And you put it on your head, and the concept was then you saw everything as it was before humanity went there. So the idea is that you could sit on the bench and enjoy a peaceful, lovely nature place that you will enjoy, being in the middle of a very polluted city. So they were kind of using virtual reality to the other side. So just to kind of wipe that image and to actually make it a very interesting place to be. So it's kind of dangerous sometimes.
That raises another issue, if I can come back on that. We've had a concern that people living in cities have forgotten what the countryside is like. They don't know one kind of tree from another, whatever. So one thing we've been trying to lead from my college is a project which is citizen science. And so the idea is to bring citizens in, to make them go out and try and identify lichens.
Yeah.
So that they become aware of what a lichen is. They've actually built up a very effective database now with a mapping of the country, which is now being used by scientists. Now I remember the skepticism in my college when we introduced this policy. We can't work with the public. You know, this is beneath us. But it's been very successful. And there are examples. And it's spread into
air pollution.
We've got children digging up worms to understand the soil. it's become a big educational program with citizen science. And citizen science has now become quite a big topic.
We have a question there, and a question here.
Usually, you make your question in international law context, of course. Usually, the question is, I will answer it in two levels, one in domestic law, in private law, and another in international law. Usually, the first question is, I have also problems in my condominium. And the answer is always, try to imagine if the law haven't give the solution of condominium for your building. Okay? Of course, you have problems, but you have a legal framework where, in the previous way, people know which are the common parts, which is responsible for the common systems, and so on. So, of course, there are conflicts, but you have one framework, and you have courts where you can go to solve the conflicts. In international law, when people talk about governance, my question is, what is the object of global governance? Is the countries, or, for example, should be their system? You understand? The question is, and global commons in international law now are the high seas, the seabed, the Antarctica, and the moon. You understand? The global commons are territories. But you have the Earth system that is inside and outside all the sovereignties. And this should be a new object of international law. And the question is, why? For what? Because when I'm polluting, I'm making a damage to the common, to global common. When I'm preserving my forests and my ecosystem, I'm making benefits to the global commons. And I should have one system of accountancy where my positive contributions and my negative contributions for the global common are accounted for. And this is a condominium, is where I have a system where I'm making positive things to the common, do not disappear in a global black hole. You understand? This is the question. And for economy is a big change, because for the first time in the history of human economy, to make positive things to the nature, to produce ecosystem service, will not disappear in a global legal law. Okay, this is the mindset. Of course, there are details like courts and conflicts that must exist. Like we have a court only for the seabed. The Convention of Common Heritage of Mankind for the seabed has one court only for the conflicts of using the seabed on the oceans. Okay, of course, after we have defined what is the global common, we need a system of governance. But do not forget, the first step of Eleanor Ostrom on the management of commons is to define what is a common pool. This is the first step to organize the use of something that is common. And we haven't yet done this first step. Okay, thank you.
Okay, two more questions. One over there, three. Let's take these four questions now.
Good afternoon. I'm sad I didn't make it from the beginning. I didn't have the chance to hear all of the presentations, but I have a question, which actually is more a share of thoughts than a question. That goes from the previous question about the message and about the communication, because I believe that there are a lot of things that have to be clarified and deconstructed, and that's a fundamental thing when you transmit certain messages. For instance, I illustrate with an ordinary example, which is I use public transportation a lot, and now there are these billboards and posted inside the buses that says that we should spare water at home and whatsoever. And so I think that this kind of message is good because it involves the regular and ordinary homo economicus of the modern society into these issues. But at the same time, it might put the guilt and the pressure on the shoulders of the people that actually are not really responsible for it. And concerning to this situation, there are also a myth that should be debunked, that is, if you turn your tap while you're having shower and while you're using your shampoo, and it would spare more water than it does when you heat a steak or whatsoever. So, and that's not true. So you spare more water if you don't have a steak for lunch than you do by turning your tap off. So that kind of things are not really clarified, and sometimes have to be more clarified so that people know how they can contribute and how they should address to solve this situation. So maybe it will be interesting to hear your opinions about these issues, about how the message reaches the people.
Thank you. Second question.
Thank you for a fascinating panel and for raising these important issues. I'm jumping into the discussion with questions from an international relations perspective. So my first question would be to Pedro, Clemente. And you presented humanity as a whole, and we had an entire panel on human rights on the basis of globalization versus universalism. So can we speak about universalist green values? What is your comment on this? The other one would be, in terms of studying international relations, in 1977, when Ed Little published Anarchical Society, he had two references to environmental issues. And in terms of international relations engagement with the earth and global environmental sustainability, we have made huge progress. And some scholars have included it within security studies, very Buzen, the sector of environmental security as one of the sectors. So in a certain period, we had a progress towards a more global international society where actors and states and non-state actors tended to follow a more solidarist view. So very recently, we witnessed a setback. And when Trump went to Paris, he was presented as a leader of a pariah state when it comes to international environmental regime. So here we also have important insights from an international relations perspective. How would you engage with the special responsibilities as the US, China? How would you engage with these questions in your endeavors and efforts?
Okay, one more and one more.
Hello. So first of all, thank you for all of your talks. I really enjoyed all of them. I'm not the only English person here today, which is nice to see. So I've lived in Portugal for 5 years now, and so I'm now familiar with the convenio model, which seems like a really interesting idea and has a lot of potential, I think. But as an English person, I remember how difficult it was for me to understand the idea of a condominium when I first arrived here, having never lived in an apartment building in my life. In England, at least in my experience, most people live in individual houses with, in a nice situation, an individual back garden. And the idea of having to approach things from a community, collective perspective where your liberty is limited by your neighbour's rights is
that was great.
It takes a little bit of time to get used to. So, how would you kind of communicate this idea to cultures and people which might very strongly value individualism and individual freedoms compared with other countries where it might be more normal to approach problems in this way?
One last.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. I have a question for you, Paulo. This is the proposal is very, very interesting and probably, and if there is wisdom in humanity, it will develop in the future. I am afraid it will not be anytime soon. Why? Because the nationals, and I mean the different kind of nationalistic narratives are much more deep-rooted in most of humanity than this a narrative about the global commons, the global humanity, etc. Okay, so the question is that, for example, the whole process of developing the idea that climate change is already an idea where there is at least some kind of familiarity with this, that has emerged and is really an idea about the way to solve this, the way to approach is a kind of flows, of atmospheric flows that are beyond national sovereignty. So people who talk about climate change are really looking at the issue as a global issue, not national sovereignty issue. But they live in a world in which national sovereignty is much more deeply rooted in the mindset of the society. Yeah. So it's very difficult to advance. So for that reason, for example, the previous model for dealing with climate change that was top-down, much more global organized, but partially, the Kyoto Protocol failed. Okay, and so now the Paris Agreement, that is considered a diplomatic success from the point of view of solving the problem of carbon emissions and decarbonization, is very extremely weak. I mean, even if there is the goals that have been established nationally, and each country say maximize national interest in establishing, and even that is difficult if you look at what has happened in most of the countries of the world in the last 2 years. This is not going in the direction of matching the commitment that they have promised in the Paris Agreement. So it's it's a very, very long trajectory, unfortunately.
Okay, so let's have some answers. I also have another question that you can fill in, which is, what is the and it's somehow related with this last one. So not only looking at the countries, but also the business sector, the companies. How can they be motivated to act concerning these different these different aspects, such as climate change, but also air pollution? Is it only through regulation? Can we? What is your perspective on what the states can do, particularly in countries where regulation cannot be applied as I would say as in Portugal, but in Portugal we have been having some problems with the Tagus River also, to manage to actually have kind of a command and control type of approach. So how can we involve business in companies in this way forward sustainability? So maybe first Paulo, then Helen, and then you can comment on the international.
First, thank you so much for the questions. Of course, this is issue that I'm working on this project for several years, I think 15 years. But I think really that, as Einstein said, we cannot solve a problem using the same way of thinking that created a problem. And when I have some experience that say, I remember I was in the floor like this one, and my colleague of my side said, my colleague is one infinite will, because he wants to change the world. It's like this. My answer is, I prefer to be one pathway that could give a solution, that to be working in a pathway that I know that is not a solution. I know that is a big pathway But this gives a hope, I think. And do not remember what Pedro Clemente said on the beginning. What moves humankind is one idea. As Victor Hugo said, nothing is more strong than one idea when its time arrives. And I really think that we need something new to solve this problem. Of course, the reality today is another one. But in this pathway, I have already seen many changes, and we only, when we are on the edge of the problem, of course, we will need a solution for us as humankind. And of course, I cannot answer this will happen in my lifetime, in your lifetime, in the next. I don't know. Probably the Earth will. What is most probably that we all have a big problem in environmental and climate collapse. Before this, it's the most problem. What we have in the history of humankind is the improbability that always makes the rule of the game. All the years I put on my agenda on the first day, on the 1st of January, one sentence of Edgar Morin, that says, "My hope is in what is improbable. What is most probable that we will not find a solution. What is improbable is to find a solution." And my hope is this one, and my pathway with the problems that this pathway give to me and my family and so on, is to make this pathway. This is what I can answer to you, okay? It's because I know that the pathway that we are doing is not a solution. We need a new legal framework, global legal framework, to solve this problem, and to try to make to put all the energies. And the reason why we are coming back on the environmental solutions is why, because we are not seeing results. The reason why in the 80s we start to have agreements and so on, and now we are starting back in these solutions because we do not find solutions, and so each one will take its own problem without caring about the rest, as it is a solution. So this is what I can answer you, and I don't know. Of course, I have no answer for this. The only answer I can give you is I know that this solution is not a solution. The actual one. I think I don't know if I answer the question of a condominium for English that has its own house. In a city is a bigger condominium than a building. A country is a bigger condominium than a city. The planet is a bigger condominium than a country. You have private fractions. Your home is a private fraction, but the street that you use is common. You have a municipality that is the manager of the global interests and the global spaces in the city and the global systems of the city, of the waste, of the water, of the electricity. A city is a condominium, a country is a condominium. Now what is missing is a global condominium.
Helen, are you a pessimist, an optimist? How can we solve all these problems? Is Paulo right? He's happy with his pathway.
Not happy. Not
happy, but convinced at least.
I think I'm a bit of a pessimist because I think the timescale.
The timescale is the great challenge.
Really difficult. I'd like to come back to some of the comments over here. That there's been very rapid evolution. The scientists have been working really hard, and they produce more and more publications, but there are uncertainties, and we've been trying to resolve the uncertainties. And I think this is difficult in getting the general picture over. It leaves loopholes for people to pick up arguments and say, but this scientist says this, that scientist says that. And I don't know how we deal with uncertainties. We have lots of problems, for example, with health. We don't really know how pollution affects health. We have all these statistical kind of relationships. we try and take precautionary principles to protect people. That's all right if you've got enough money and you can do it, but you can't necessarily achieve that. And so this, I think, comes up to what happens when you get an obstacle like Mr. Trump. My feeling is if you come up to an obstacle, you just go round it. You find other routes. And I think this is where we need to deal with lots of different levels. It's slightly different. But we need to be making sure that companies are convinced that the people that are going to take action. We see this happening in the States, that companies are still going on, states are still going on without Trump. And so I think, we need to look at all the little roads as well as the big roads in taking this route. The other thing about companies is that they are very much part of the economic network. If we look at where our pensions are invested, they're invested in the oil companies. If we look at where the UK government is getting its tax from, it's getting it from the oil taxes, from you driving your car. I think in the UK we contribute £1,000 from every household to the government's tax per year from driving our cars. So it's very embedded in the financial system, and I think companies are very aware of this. I mean, we're seeing the big companies like Shell recognizing that the future is not in oil. But, I mean, I'm talking to geologists who are trying to change their career because as exploratory geologists, they realize that's a dead end. We don't need those people anymore. And they're being dismissed from these companies. So these things are happening, these changes are going on. And I think these financial pressures and recognizing that you need to think, the companies need to think about their future is part of the key.
And before I give the word to Pedro, just there was this question on the credibility of the information and the comparison of the information. Of let's stop our shower for 2 or 3 minutes and we're saving a lot of water, but then we have lunch with food that's required a lot of water. That's, I say, it's a real important and critical issue. Just in 1 minute, I previously collaborated in a TV show called The Green Minute, and that was really a problem I had, because sometimes I knew that the message that I was giving only represented a little bit of contribution, and sometimes another message would mean a huge contribution. So it is really a critical issue. We need to have a communication strategy in the environmental area where I can explain or have the context for the people to understand the different footprints that they actually have in the environment concerning their lifestyles. It's not easy, but it's important for everyone to have this perspective that we should save water everywhere, but okay, there are priorities, and those priorities have to be well communicated. And I think that if we talk about water, you talk about energy, about CO2, and it's really important to I don't know how we say that in English, but to separate the important stuff from the irrelevant ones. One other issue that I would like to comment is on the Paris Agreement and the Kyoto Protocol. I've been following the climate change negotiations for a long time, and it is true that the Paris Agreement has a lot of uh, problems to become a reality, or at least to achieve the main goal, which is to assure that the temperature doesn't go above 2 degrees Celsius compared with the pre-industrial era, and particularly to get it as low as a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase, and also to have carbon neutrality during this century, the second half of this century. But for me, the Paris Agreement was really important in terms of the framework, because everyone collaborates and everyone has a target. And that was a huge step compared with the Kyoto Protocol. With the Kyoto Protocol, it was clearly a top-down approach for the developed countries, and now you have everyone on board. And of course, you may question that, and it's true. We're not that if we sum up the goals of all the countries, we're going to get 4 degrees Celsius increase instead of the 1.5. But everyone is on board, and it was a bottom-up approach instead of a top-down. So there are indeed issues at the international level that I think we can look at and have some hope on the way that we are framing them. And as Helen said, even without the United States in the Paris Agreement, formally that still didn't happen. They're still part of the agreement. But even with the government, with the political position out of the Paris Agreement, the companies and the states and the municipalities are in. So I really enjoyed your view of, we may have a motorway, but we may have the small roads that also get there, and we can have these different pathways to get our goal. And now, Pedro,
yeah, just to answer your question, thanks a lot for your question. I hope I can answer properly. So I think there are lots of values and environmental values that are universal or that are international, and we can easily kind of recognize some examples if you think about tangible things. For example, you have like species like pandas or the polar bear that everyone likes, everyone gives money to protect, everyone wants to exist, everyone thinks it's important to have. Uh, I'll probably never see a polar bear in my life, but I'm willing to keep him and to pay money to have him. So there are some things that we could build upon and can provide a message that they are globally important and relevant to conserve. The issue is are the software things, the intangible things, such as the water cycle or air quality or something like that, because um, there's a lot of research, and we also do that when we ask people, so which of these environmental values or environmental ecosystem services, which are now called the new term, so which ones do you think are important? And usually people across the world usually consider very much important the ones that are actually global. So you see, okay, so everyone recognizes that. And then you ask them, so are you willing to spend time or money, or on which services are you willing to spend time or money to keep them or to preserve them? And that's another thing. So because there's a thing called benefit spillovers. Because one thing is that I think that things that are global are important. Another thing is that I have to spend money or time in something that the benefit will not be mine. So it would be to another country or to the whole world. So despite recognizing the international global value of things, people are more interested in protecting or keeping local things, their own things, for their own children, for their own future. So it's a bit of thing that it's challenging, and you have to build this new story, this new narrative that might engage people in this effort. So linking to your question of water, there's kind of this mismatch between narratives. We can see it recently in Portugal about the scarcity of water. So I have a house here in Lisbon, and I have another in the north of Portugal. And where I have the other house, my grandmother's house, there was no water. actually no water. They just have to bring trucks with water to give to the community to have for a few hours to have water. But in Lisbon, the Ministry of Environment was saying, no, it's okay. We still have like 3 months of water. It will rain. There's no problem. Nobody knows if it will rain. So he's not completely sure that we will have water. So if you go to Alentejo today, there are dams that are like 8%, 10%, almost in March. So you do have these mismatched narratives, and you, if you are living in Lisbon, you just say, it's no problem. I have water. The ministry says it's okay. So even within the same country, using regarding the same resources, you don't have the same story. So it's difficult for you to have like coordinated or coordinated action or coordinated strategy if people are learning from different informations or from different data. So I think that's a bit of the challenge of scientists is to work harder with politicians and just make them acknowledge that they are actually relevant instead of just making politics, because sometimes that's what they do.
I'd like to say something after your comment. You talk about people that want to preserve its local things for the children. The question, it doesn't work. You have to have a global, because you know the water in the local things. Without water, you will not solve your local problem. We cannot solve local problems without have a global acknowledgement of all the system. Okay, I only want to say that this question of the legal recognition of something that is global is not new. When the question of climate change in the 80s started to be discussed in United Nations, the discussion was if the climate system should have or not a legal recognition. This is a deep discussion inside the UN, and the solution was not recognize a new object of law, but recognize a common concern of humankind. Until today, no one knows what is the common concern of humankind in a legal perspective. What we are proposing is to make a step further and to transform a common concern in a new object of law that is a common heritage. This is not something so crazy. The discussions start in the 80s, and now we have the scientific tools to define a new global common. It could be not so extraterrestrial, we say, ovni. It's not so ovni like it could appear on the first class.
Hi, I'm Ms. Cosma. I'm a PhD student at the Global Studies program. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you, Pedro, for representing us here today. So I was wondering, I was connecting the dots that many people were discussing or trying to discuss, and I can't help but think that sometimes when it comes to the civil society and how we communicate with them, some of us scientists treat people like they are stupid. Like, why are we only giving advice for closing the tap water? Like, it's the easier version. I debate this with so many people, and they say, "Oh, this is not going to offend anyone." So if we talk about not eating meat, for instance, that it's much more important than closing the tap water while you are brushing your teeth. People will say, no, that's a cultural issue. No, you don't want to go into that. And so what my comment was that I'm currently researching about this grassroots movement that try to change things, to engage in the transition. And so what many authors say and are trying to do research upon is that it's not only regulations, it's not only global, not global, new institutions in general that are going to solve the problem. And mostly we are not, there's this temptation to convince people that they have to change.
And I don't agree with that. I think we have to engage people in different ways, in new ways, that will help them think, oh, I matter. Because if we continue to say to people, oh, just close the tap water and we'll be fine, I think we are not going anywhere. Like people, they feel that climate change is such a huge problem, and I'm so far away from that problem. That problem belongs to politics and to scientists that know about this. And so it's for me, it's offensive to treat people that way. I think we should give them the opportunity to feel that they matter, and then when they are engaged, truly engaged, they will want to change because they are not stupid. They want to protect the planet and where they live. And so, talking about what Pedro was saying about new narratives, some people also try to research on that. How can we change? Maybe it's through changing the narratives and not the way we do public participation. No, maybe that's not the problem. Maybe the problem is the narrative behind everything. And if we connect to people with this, with stories and with like pathways of change instead of little measures here and there, maybe they will understand better why we have to change. And so I would like to know your opinion on this, not convincing people, but trying to empower people so they feel like they belong to the system, they belong to the solution. It's not like a very far away thing that only brilliant minds know. And so, what's your opinion on that?
Thank you very much. Very exciting panel. I have one comment and one question to Paulo. Because I know that here there are lots of people with very different backgrounds, I would like to make a statement. Everything that you are hearing here, that maybe you can approach it as an environmental problem, is not an environmental problem. In the last years, I have been making this message loudly and often and often. When there are forest fires in Portugal, the problem is not with the nature. The nature has no problem with forest fire. The nature loves forest fire because after the fire, the nature comes stronger with new species, with new conditions. There's no problem with the nature with forest fires. There's no problem with the water shortage that is now running in Cape Town. No problem with the nature. The nature is because of the people that live there. The problem with forest fire in Portugal is because of the assets and the people that die in that occasions. There's no problem with nature with I'll be a bit more radical. There's no problem with the air pollution in Beijing. I mean the concentrations of particulate. What's the problem with the nature? There are some wind that come with to bring that particulate to another scene, to another areas. The particulate will laying down. The problem is with the human that live there. So every problem is a problem to Homo sapiens. And if you look at this perspective,
she extended too much.
Everything what we are discussing here is something that we have to be discussed in human rights discipline, in the law discipline, in economics discipline, and it's why this is so important in this global studies program. And one of the key points we can explore now from all of these disciplines, the problem of human rights and the water shortage, human rights and air pollution in China. But the problem that I would like to stress here, or the issue that I would like to stress here is questions to Paulo, because it's directly to there. Everything I think is moving regarding these problems, environmental problems, but there is one system that I see is not moving ahead a little. Is the economic system. We still do, in the 21st century, we approach economics as the exactly way that we approach the 20th century and even in the 19th century. Someone said that there is a good idea to say that the climate change problem, the climate change is the result of the biggest market failure of the 20th century economy. But we are not changing nothing in the economic system. I mean, the way we approach the transaction of goods and services, we have some tentative, some experience in order to approach and to include in the economic system some of the intangibles, but I mean, there's nothing to present with as a good example. So my question to Paulo is that in a condominium, in a building or in a city, there are exchanging of costs, benefits and costs, and we have to have a model to, and we have your model has a serious problem with that. How do you think, or what is your proposal or your ideas about the economics of the software? Because, I mean, how can we value the software? Because you have to exchange costs about this software. So this is my
Master Ferreira.
Well, I don't really have a question, I have a provocation. You talk about creating a new global common and the need of engaging with the public. And I'm thinking, why should we need the public? Because I look to the cities that are global common. Untitled Convention didn't need the public support. The regulation of space didn't have popular support. So why are you trying to mix public into it? Just go to politics. They do that, we are both done. It's more efficient, more practical, more cost efficient. I'll say so.
Yeah,
I'd like to hear your thoughts about that.
That seems like the discussion between government and governance this morning.
Yes,
a little bit. Okay, so any last minute question? Oh.
Last minute.
Okay.
It's very big. Just one question and one idea. One question more to Helen. As I understood, since the sulfur, the beginning of sulfur protocol, the results are becoming better.
Yes.
Okay. At the same time, in the last decade in Europe, industry and population are leaving Europe. So there's, in those studies are considered the leaving of population and industry from Europe in those results.
Right, okay, I can answer that one. Yeah.
Okay.
The other point just about communication. I agree with Ines. So the things will need to become from the bottom to the top, and the people should be engaged in the situation. Two examples of that are one regarding the condominium. I think hostels are doing a great job with that. So you save money and you start to share some common spaces. It's the beginning of understanding that principle of sharing. And on the other way, because humans also like to have fun, a couple of years ago, there was a game called Pokemon Go that started, I think it was the beginning of introduce the population to the virtual reality and augmented reality. So it's a way to start to approach the new technologies. So these two approaches, so go to your wallet, save some money, and at the same time start to sharing some common spaces and have fun since you are introducing the new technologies, are two examples for the solutions that we need for people to get more engaged in this solution, in these problems. Thank you.
Last minute answer.
Upon your previous topic that you were talking about the COP21 in Paris, that you were optimistic about it, and also linking that to the Politician Act. So what came out from this conference doesn't really solve the climate problem, because what the countries agreed on doesn't go below the 2 degrees temperature limit. So it might be also not too safe to deliver this decision to the people that are deciding?
Okay, I will comment on that.
Yeah.
Close. No more questions now, Paulo.
Start
Please,
answering.
around 3 minutes or so, such that we can manage the
About
coffee break
communication,
afterwards.
first about communication, the question of Inês, and also the previous question about using the informatic and virtual ways. I always afraid of very strong split between the reality and the environmental reality, our reality and the environmental reality. And the virtual technology, it could be this side effect to create another world different from reality. And the message of that in his talk, I think the most important message for the next generation and for this generation is the sense of belonging to that system. Okay? To have the consciousness of that system, to have the consciousness that we belong, humanity is part of, it's one element of that system. When we are breathing, we are changing the state of that system because we belong to that system. We are, it's one of the most important things that Will Stephan, that works on this, is always saying, humanity is part of that system. It's not a side of it. Okay? And I think this is one idea very strong. To connect each individual with the system, okay, and to give this notion to the next generation and to the students. The value of the software, of course, this is one central piece, and probably inside the project is the less developed part of the project. We have not yet, we have the scientists with us, we have jurists with us, we have not yet economists, we have people from Global Footprint with us, we have yet economists with us. The question is, sorry, we are talking about one economy of intangibles of nature. We have to put a value on nitrogen, on CO2, on ozone, on all the 9 planet boundaries. Okay, which are the amount of these intangibles of nature that you produce in your country and you consume in your country. You need to know this, and we must. In the end, the idea is to compensate. I'm not a specialist in CO2, but I'm a specialist in ozone, for example, and I can compensate my balance with the commons, and I have one price for a debt and a credit. Okay, so this is the way to put a value on the work of nature, because the work of nature, of biosphere, is intangible, and this is some kind of to put not a price but a value. Okay, it's not something that is a market, is a system of compensation, because the market suppose that I can do not put the thing without receiving the money. This is impossible. This system, the things are available for everyone, and my damage and my benefits are always available for everyone. I need a system of compensation. This is different from a market system that is a system with the price to put someone outside without access to the common good. So this is really something we need to develop. But of course, all the system that was built is built to achieve to that moment. Okay, to say that the Earth system will be a common heritage of mankind without having a system of compensation and accountancy, it's soft law, and we have a lot of soft law already. Usually, in the preamble of the conventions, we have always, for example, in the seas, we have the seas are common, are global common, and so on. And after all the convention is a division of the sea. Just to the politicians, the other comment of you. Yes, in some way, we need to go to the political, and we are already doing this work. We are starting to have meetings with embassies here in Portugal, but we need this feeling of belonging to the Earth system, feeling of belong to the human family, and this is something the new generations need to understand we depend on the others, the interdependence. It's not worth to export pollution. We're still thinking to use green diesel here and to destroy forests in the tropical countries. This is the same colonial thinking that we still have yet, because we are exporting pollution. Okay, we import products, and the emissions are not made here in my country, but the emissions are the products that I use are polluting in other countries. We're still thinking in this way, and the Anthropocene is to thinking in a global way, to think that doesn't work to export pollution. The pollution will come to my country again, and we will depend on the same system.
Helen.
Can I come back on that? Some of the biggest arguments I have had as a scientist has been with environmental economists. I think it's the most difficult profession, and this is what we're needing in this kind of field. So, you know, I've worked with economists that are trying to do this kind of valuation. They're stuck because if you're putting a value on forests, as you said, you know, the wood value of the forest is very small. So you go to criteria like willingness to pay. But before you get very far, you're in difficulties with willingness to pay. You would get a very high value on saving a polar bear, but you get a very low value on solving some kind of insect that is absolutely key, or something that is very low down in the food chain. The general willingness to pay would be very small for the things that are really important. I think the biggest argument I have ever had is if I look at myself as an atmospheric doctor, and I can see that what we're doing is changing the operation. You know, the atmosphere is a fluid. It's acting like the blood system. I can see changes in the atmosphere that are like boosting the white cell relative to the red cell. And I try and explain this to an environmental economist and say, I think this is something that's really dangerous. We're seeing symptoms of how we are changing the functioning of the Earth system. Put a value on it. And they say, oh, we can't do that. That's not worth anything. You know, we don't understand that. So it's just not worth anything. So I think we've got some real barriers and some real problems with trying to develop environmental economics. That was one thing. Somebody said over there, well, China was not a democracy, but Paris stopped the traffic, and I think France would think it was a democracy. So I don't think that's necessarily the thing. There's a question over here about, in Europe, have we diverted things elsewhere? I think we've tried to be very careful on that. I mean, one thing that we have a big problem with is shipping, because now the emissions from shipping in Europe are bigger than they are from the land countries. And we've had to be very careful, because if we start saying, well, you can only use clean fuel in Europe, then where's the fuel going? The dirty fuel is going to poor countries. So I think we have recognized that problem, and we have taken it into account in the discussions that we've had. So we try, and I don't think we've exported that much industry from Europe. You know, not on this kind of scale. And it's things like our transport that are the real problem now, which is obviously growing and not something that we can export.
Okay, I want to comment two things. Paris Agreement. Okay, the great idea, I think, of the Paris Agreement is that it's a process and it's not a protocol or a static protocol like Kyoto. So this year, 2018, when we go to a difficult country, I would say Poland in December for the next COP, for COP 24, we will discuss new targets compared with the ones that were committed in 2015. And the idea, and we will have a scientific report that will come out in October 10th about how we can achieve, if we can achieve, how we can achieve an increase of only 1.5 degrees Celsius. So we do have this idea of, keeping every 5 years, we're looking at the emissions of the greenhouse gases emissions and try to lower them as far as possible with the information from the scientific community that will be conveyed 2 months before the next conference in December. So I'm not that optimistic, but I think that we found a process that may engage us into minimizing the impacts of climate change. Now, Inês said that we only communicate the easy things because they're easier to communicate, but I think that I really enjoyed in the morning when I don't remember exactly who talked about government and governance, and governance indeed is a great excuse because governance, you put everyone, which is in a more democratic and participatory process, which is excellent, but at the same time the government gets excused of doing some of their duties, of its duties. And we really need this equilibrium. That's really important to explain. There are things that are, what we need in Lisbon is clearly to stop a lot of the traffic to comply with the limit values for NO2 and particles. If you go through a governance point of view, if you talk with all the stakeholders, that's what I did in the project through the university, you actually you don't go anywhere because the taxi drivers don't even think about it. Electric vehicles are too expensive. I need to take my car to the parking lot. There's also all these goods that have to go to the restaurant, and you don't go anywhere. So sometimes you really need to, you need an equilibrium between government and governance, and government is indeed important to take measures that sometimes are priorities that have to take place in regard to the common good. But that would make us a 3-hour discussion afterwards. So Pedro,
just a final remark. I completely agree with you, Helen, on the economics because in these last years I've been working as ecological economist, and I've been done all of that willingness to pay, choice experiments, everything like that. And I started very happy in this job because I was thinking that, so currently politicians and companies usually have a 0 value in their spreadsheet when they decide for these things. And I said, no, I'm going there, I'm going to replace that 0 for a value. So what they did was, okay, this is the value, so we can destroy that and we compensate the same value somewhere else. So I think that's not the point. So now I'm going backwards, and what I'm trying to do, and has been working out quite well, is that we kind of use that value or intervals of values kind of to show the trade-offs or explore the trade-offs and just show people that probably they're not so far away, or the change is not so far in terms of costs, or if they go this way or the other one, what will imply. So it's kind of a more informative value. So in that sense, I'm not sure if in your model would make more sense, because we are working also with monetary and non-monetary values, because you cannot put a price on everything, cultural identity or something like that, but we can use that as an informative asset.
Thank you very much. Paulo, you have in the cafeteria after the closure.
Good evening. During the past 2 days, we discussed what we know about the relation between globalization and human rights, empires in history, democracy and security, and Earth sustainability. On behalf of NOVA doctoral program, on global studies. I'm proud to say that we were very fortunate to host such an interesting group of scholars and are immensely proud of the role played by the PhD candidates enrolled in the program in the lively discussions we had. This program was created in 2013, aiming to bring together emerging research on globalization issues and to establish an interdisciplinary framework for thinking about globalization, both historically and in the present. Since its beginning, the program has enrolled 51 students, 26 of which have their PhD projects now underway. And 25 scholarships were granted by the program. These students, as you may have noticed, come from very distinct disciplinary grounds: engineering, history, international relations, law, economics, and so forth. And although students, most of the students were born in European countries, we are very pleased to see that the share of candidates coming from other countries and other continents is indeed growing. NOVA Global Studies has also been committed to organizing a series of events to facilitate exchanges on current issues related to globalization. Besides lectures, the calendar of events includes workshops, seminars, and targets participants from beyond NOVA and beyond academia, such as other scientists, activists, environmentalists, policymakers, journalists, and other professionals. This is the first conference organized by the program. The intent of this event is twofold, or was twofold: make a contribution to a much needed clarification on globalization studies, and also to bring to the Portuguese public a broad debate on issues related to globalization. Globalization is a topic which has been receiving much attention in the media, but sometimes in very strange ways. Most of all, as elsewhere, there is an overtone to the way globalization is being brought to the public. In some way, it is related to the politicization, a difficult word, of issues such as migration, deindustrialization, the role of Asia in the world economy, and so forth. The revolution in communication, notably the surge of the so-called social media, has also played probably some role in this, due to the creation of new public fora, while the old space dominated by the traditional mass media is now profoundly fragmented and polarized. This has been discussed in this last panel. Those who call for actions against global warming, ensuring the planet's sustainability, are opposed directly by people who do not accept the evidence of global warming. Those who plead for the institution of human rights as a means to cohesive societies are opposed by those who don't believe in the equality of all humans. And those who defend the rule of law as a sine qua non condition for democracy are opposed by those who do not see the universality of rules as a requisite for democracy. Arguments predicated in evidence, gathered following the scientific method, and reasoning based on rational arguing are directly challenged by other forms of knowledge, based in religious beliefs, philosophical stances, or other understandings, or Weltanschauung. Both the status of science and of scholars are contested on the grounds that rational arguments can only deliver a vision, and a fragmented one, of the world we live in. Given the plurality and polarization of the world we live in, students of globalization are often caught between distinct motivations, doing good research and at the same time one that can serve the non-scientific purposes they cherish. Is it possible not to be caught in activism when studying the devastating effects of drought in the Iberian Peninsula, for example? Or keep your stance on universal rights when identity politics has the upper hand in many academic circles? And what do we learn from the direct and universal consultations, such as referenda, when it ends up depriving groups of individuals from certain rights? The questions brought to this conference by the students of this PhD program show they are aware that delineating interesting and challenging research problems can be a successful path towards doing academic research without reneging both one's belief and values and scientific requirements. And by engaging in ongoing discussions with scholars, activists, or others, not only they can put themselves and their ideas to the test of contradictory debate, train their own rational arguments and debating skills, but they can also make a contribution to scientific research as an important institution in society. To end this closing address, I wish hereby to thank, in the name of NOVA Doctoral Program on Global Studies, all the participants from outside the program for coming to Lisbon, thank them for the magnificent talks they gave and the interesting discussions we had. And I want also to ensure everyone that we will be in contact very soon in order to start the arrangements for the preparation of the book. I also want to make a pledge concerning the 3 areas of the program which are missing from this event. Soon, we hope to start organizing a second conference covering these important domains: global markets, global health, and human migration. As usual, organizers will be facing a lot of work. So, an alert to all the students still present: all help is welcome, and you can sign up as soon as possible. A final note is in order to thank, in the name of NOVA Doctoral Program, the magnificent group of people who organized this event, and may I say, made it work even better than a Swiss watch. Isabel Nicole and Andrea Zorrinho, members of the NOVA staff, who are not here, but who were crucial for keeping the logistic arrangements and procedures moving as swiftly and efficiently as possible. Franco Tomassoni, Pedro Ponti Souza, Vera Martins, Inês Cosmos, Julia Iannuzzi, and Romário Basílio, all PhD students, who took care of literally everything, from talking to the catering firms, to creating the website, organizing the opening presentations of each panel, etc. They were all brilliant. So to end this session, I would ask a big applause to all of them. They were fantastic. Having said this, thank you very much for coming. Thank you for the flowers. Well, I'm sharing this with all of the students who organized this, okay?